In this video, we will show you how to replace your rear parking brake shoes and hardware on this Jeep Grand Cherokee. This will be located behind your rear wheel and brakes. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Continuing from there, we're going to remove all 5 of our 22mm lug nuts in the wheel. To remove the brake caliper, we're going to remove our 2 18mm headed mounting bolts holding it in place. There's one out in the open down along the bottom here and one just above it. After you remove the first one, go ahead and start it back in just a couple threads, fully remove the second. Now we can remove the brake caliper, inspect the brake pads. If it looks like they're worn or damaged, you want to go ahead and do a brake job. Other than that, as far as the caliper, make sure it's not leaking. Assuming that looks good, you want to hang this aside, putting no pressure on your flex hose. Now we'll remove our rotor. Let's start removing our parking brake shoes. To remove these, you're going to find several pieces of hardware. You'll find that you have an adjuster. There's a small spring holding it together in this area, but to be able to get this out of here, we have to carefully start separating the 2 shoes from each other, so we have to dismount the first one. To remove this, I'm going to tap it to dislodge it. Quick inspection, set it aside. Now we can get the pin out of there. That just pulls out from along the back side of the backing plate. Continuing from here, take hold of the shoe that you were to remove the hardware from. We're going to give it a light tug, stretching this spring and removing the adjuster. If you have a hard time tugging on it, you could use a small prying device as well. Be careful for any pinch points while you're in this area. Now we can start removing the spring. The spring itself comes through from the back side. So for this, you just want to try to squeeze this area together. Pull the small hook out of the hole in the shoe. Let's continue on that same shoe. In this area, you're going to find that you have a small port, and you can see the hook of one of our springs. We have to dislodge that and push it out towards the inboard side here. To do that, I'm just using my small pry bar. Just apply a little bit of pressure. Once again, being careful for any pinch points. You can see it's starting to make its way through there. At this point, we can start pulling this down and out of here. We'll dislodge the next spring in that lower hole. There's one of our shoes. Now we can remove our next parking brake shoe. We have our locking clip. We'll drive this out of place. Keep in mind, this is the last thing holding the shoe and the hardware in here. There's our other shoe. Let's get the spring out of here. And lastly, our pin. Continuing on, we need to remove the actuator so we can ensure that it's freed up and lubricated. Ours is actually frozen in place. We'll continue on with some penetrant. We're going to have to work this a little bit, but eventually we can pull this right off of the emergency brake cable, which is located inside of this port here. You can see the very tip of it. go. Now this point right here should be able to pivot in and out. If it feels like it's stuck like this one, it's pretty much bound up. You definitely want to free it up and re-lubricate it. At this point, I've cleaned and lubricated the actuator. We'll set this aside. Continuing from here, you need to thoroughly inspect the emergency brake cable end here. If it looks like your emergency brake cable is damaged or frozen in some way, replace it. Now's the time. Let's clean up the backing plate and mounting area. We can start reinstalling the rest of our hardware and emergency brake shoes. Now it's time for the actuator. When installing this, you want to make sure you have it in the proper orientation, the same way we removed it. We want to make sure we have this hooked area going through the very end of the emergency brake cable. Now once you have it going through there, we're going to carefully start closing this. At this point, with the actuator closed, it should be holding the emergency brake cable in the proper position. Apply some high temperature caliper lubricant to all of these mounting areas. Let's lubricate the adjuster here using high temperature lubricant. You can also use anti-seize if you want. We'll take the adjustment star almost all the way down to the far end here. You have the other end of this. We'll set this aside. Now it's time to install our emergency brake shoes. When installing the shoes, you want to have your long spring. We're taking it from the back side of the shoes and putting it through the second port from the bottom. Continuing from there, we're going to take the spring and bring it over the actuator, all the way over to the other side. While holding onto this, it's time to start installing the other shoe. We'll have that spring make its way through the backside on that second port from the bottom, just the same as the first. Now at this point, we're going to have to carefully start stretching the shoes over this area here and pressing it in up against the backing plate. We want to make sure we have that up and over the adjuster. Now at this point, if you needed to, you could carefully try to pry. Just be extremely careful for any pinch points at all times. Let's get this lower spring on there now. This one's going to go inside the lower ports. Start it in on one side. Now we're going to have to bring this all the way over to the other port here. For this, you want to try to use a hook type tool. We'll bring this over by stretching it and pressing it into the shoe. With the lower springs in place, we're going to continue on with one of our anchor pins. This comes through from the back side of the backing plate. You can see it making its way through right here. As we make our way through that, we have to press the shoe into the proper position and slide the pin through the shoe as well. Continuing from here, we have our metal clip. For this, you want to align the tip of the pin with the slotted hole on the clip. Press the clip together, squeezing it essentially, and then twist that pin so it's completely locked in. Sometimes when pressing the clip, you have to spin the pin with some pliers. Otherwise, you can just spin it from along the back side of the backing plate. Now it's time for our last spring. That'll make its way across the upper portion of the shoes. For this spring, we want to have it facing so the little hooks are facing outward. We'll have it just like this. To do that, I'm just going to flex the shoes apart and we can align the spring. Continuing from here, it's time for our adjuster. You want to make sure you have it in the proper orientation. When you align this, you can see the slots on the adjuster. Those will fit where the shoe is. Now, as you can tell looking up here, it's not completely seated. This can potentially be very dangerous. Make sure it's seated properly before you continue on. We'll double check both sides. Continue on to your last anchor point. Get this anchor pin through the back side of the backing plate here. Continuing from there, we have our metal clip. At this point, we'll pay attention to the hub mating surface. This is where your brake rotor will sit. We want to make sure it's a clean mating surface. You can use a wire brush or a light sanding disc. After the surface is as clean as possible, we'll continue on with some anti-seize on the mating surface. If you're reusing your original rotor, you want to make sure you clean up the back side on the mating surface here. After cleaning that, we can install it on the vehicle. When you go to install the rotor, we're going to slide it over the emergency brake shoes. We want to have a pre-adjustment on these, so when you slide it over, you want to make sure you don't have any resistance, but you do also want to be able to hear a light touch of the shoes on the inside of the rotor. If you have a hard time sliding it on, you want to de-adjust your adjuster. And if it sounds like it's too loose, it's not making any contact at all, you need to adjust it out a little bit, but make sure you don't have too much friction. Let's get our caliper in place here. With the caliper in position, we can start in our 2 caliper bracket bolts, snug them up, and then torque those to 89 foot-pounds. One last quick inspection in this area. Let's reinstall our wheel. Start on all 5 of your 22mm lug nuts. We'll bottom them out. Get the wheel safely on the ground, and we can torque each of these to 130 foot-pounds. With the wheel back on the ground, we'll be torquing these to 130 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friend, we finished our installation. The process for one side of the vehicle is the exact same thing as the other. Once you've completed that, you want to make sure you pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm and test the emergency brake functionality. Aside from that, thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.